The heavy iron key snapped in the lock of Evelyn's childhood home. But the door didn't just open. It exhaled. A cold, stagnant draft, carrying the scent of cherry tobacco and rotting wallpaper, rushed out to meet her, as if the house had been holding its breath for decades. As she peeled back a strip of yellowed paper in the hallway, the plaster groaned and crumbled, revealing not just stone, but a hidden cavity stuffed with leather-bound ledgers. She opened the first one, expecting family recipes or old letters, only to find a clinical log of her mother's breaking point, written in her father's elegant, precise hand. A shadow suddenly blotted out the afternoon sun through the frosted glass of the front door. Before she could hide the book, the heavy, rhythmic thud of a fist against wood shook the frame, followed by the metallic jingle of a duty belt. "Evelyn?" A voice boomed from the porch, low and heavy with unearned authority. "The whole town is proud of your father's legacy. It would be a terrible mistake to start digging up ground that's already been leveled." She looked from the terrifying archives in her lap to the silhouette on the porch, realizing the saint of the town had left behind a map of his crimes, and the neighbors were already standing guard over the secret. The heavy iron key resisted at first, a stubborn relic of a man who never surrendered anything without a fight. Evelyn McCoy leaned her weight into the turn, feeling the tumblers groan within the lock, a dry, metallic protest that echoed through the silent porch. With a final, sharp crack of shifting wood, the front door of the McCoy estate yielded, swinging open on hinges that screamed from years of neglect. The air that rushed out to meet her was a preserved tomb of memory. It carried the suffocating weight of settled dust, the sour tang of rotting wallpaper, and a faint, ghostly undertone of the cherry tobacco Arthur had smoked every evening for 40 years. Evelyn stepped over the threshold, her boots clicking sharply against the floorboards before the sound was swallowed by the thick, tattered velvet of the hallway runner. Shadows pooled in the corners of the foyer, cast by massive oak furniture that seemed to loom over her like silent sentinels. She reached out, her fingers brushing the edge of the mahogany sideboard, and a jolt of ice raced up her spine. The house felt less like a building and more like a predator holding its breath, the very walls vibrating with the phantom pressure of a gaze she had spent half her life trying to outrun. She didn't linger in the entryway. The stillness was a provocation, a reminder of the vacuum Arthur's death had left in this town, a hole that Charleston seemed desperate to fill with myth. Evelyn moved toward the parlor, her eyes catching the jagged edges of the wallpaper where it had begun to curl away from the plaster like dead skin. She needed to move, to strip away the layers of this place before they could settle on her again. Finding a rusted spatula in the kitchen drawer, she returned to the hallway and drove the metal edge under a seam of yellowed paper. It came away with a dry, rhythmic rasp, exposing gray concrete beneath that looked uncomfortably like bruised flesh. As she pulled a long, jagged strip free, a deep, guttural groan vibrated through the floorboards. High above, the ceiling groaned in sympathy, and a fine white powder of pulverized plaster began to rain down, coating her hair and stinging her eyes. She coughed, the dust tasting of lime and ancient, trapped air. The house wasn't just old. It was rotting from the center out, the foundation grinding itself into silt. She froze, tool in hand, listening to the skittering sounds within the walls, the dry, papery rustle of something shifting in the dark. A sudden, thunderous percussion at the front door shattered the silence. Evelyn flinched, the spatula clattering to the floor. Through the frosted glass of the side panels, a massive silhouette blotted out the weak afternoon sun, casting a long, distorted shadow that stretched across the foyer to her feet. She opened the door to find Sheriff Miller. He stood with his hat in his hand, his hair a short cropped field of silver. his uniform pressed with a precision that bordered on the military. His mouth curved into a smile, but his eyes remained flat, as unyielding as the stones in the riverbed. "Evelyn," he said, his voice a low, practiced rumble. He didn't wait for an invitation. He simply stepped into the hall, his heavy leather duty belt creaking with every motion. His hand came to rest on the doorframe, a proprietary gesture that made Evelyn's stomach turn. "The whole town's been talking about you coming back. We all miss him, you know. Your father was the bedrock of this community, a man of singular honor." Evelyn watched him, her throat tight. Miller's gaze wasn't on her. It was wandering over the stripped walls, the piles of debris, the evidence of her intrusion. "Honor is a heavy word, Sheriff," she managed to say, her voice sounding thin against the vastness of the house. "It's the only word that matters in Charleston," Miller replied, his tone shifting, the warmth evaporating to leave something cold and sharp underneath. He patted the wood of the frame. "People here have long memories. They like things to stay where they were put. It'd be a shame to see a McCoy start digging up ground that's already been leveled." He left her with that, a warning wrapped in a condolence. But the weight of his presence lingered long after his patrol car had crunched down the gravel drive. It pushed her deeper into the house, away from the windows, and toward the only place Arthur had ever truly kept for himself. The cellar door was a heavy, blackened slab of oak. Evelyn descended the stairs, the air growing thick with the smell of damp earth and oxidized iron. Her flashlight beam cut through the gloom, dancing over stacks of coal and rusted garden tools until it snagged on a vertical line in the brickwork behind an old tool bench. It was too straight, too deliberate. She put her shoulder against the bench, the metal legs screaming against the concrete as she shoved it aside. Behind it lay a false panel, and behind that, the dull gleam of a steel safe dial. Her fingers went numb as she worked the combination, numbers she had found scribbled in the back of an old hymnal months ago. With a heavy, satisfying thunk, the bolts retracted. Inside, stacked with the neatness of a ledger, were dozens of leather-bound journals. Evelyn didn't go back upstairs. She sat on the cold, dirt-dusted floor of the cellar, the flashlight propped against a crate, and opened the first volume. The handwriting was unmistakable. Arthur's elegant, rhythmic script, the letters marching across the page with terrifying order. October 14th. Subject showed signs of resistance to the new medication schedule. Substituted the sedative with calcium carbonate. Observed increased heart rate and tremors during the evening meal. Phase 1 of the deconstruction is proceeding within expected parameters. Evelyn felt the air leave her lungs. She turned the pages, her heart hammering against her ribs. It wasn't a diary. It was a clinical log. Arthur had documented her mother's descent into madness, not as a tragedy, but as a project. He recorded the exact moments he whispered lies through the bedroom door to make her doubt her senses. He charted her tears on a graph. He noted the precise dosage of psychological trauma required to break her will. The hours bled into each other. The flashlight dimmed, and Evelyn replaced the batteries with shaking hands, her mind reeling. She read about the Sunday dinners, events she remembered as quiet, orderly affairs, and found they were actually tests of endurance, where Arthur would plant subtle seeds of discord just to see how long it took for her mother to break into a cold sweat. Every smile in her childhood had been a variable, every silence a measured tactic. By the time the first light of dawn began to bleed through the high, narrow cellar windows, Evelyn had reached the journals from her own college years. She found a section labeled with her name, the ink dark and fresh. Evelyn shows a persistent interest in the arts. Unacceptable. sent anonymous correspondence to the dean regarding her unstable associations, directed her focus toward the teacher's college through a series of reinforced debt obligations. The puppet strings remained taut. A wave of nausea crashed over her. Every choice she thought she'd made, her career, her move back home, even the friends she'd lost, had been a play orchestrated by a man sitting in a leather chair with a glass of scotch. She wasn't a person to him. She was a data point. The ring of the telephone upstairs shattered her trance. She scrambled up the stairs, her legs cramping, and made it to the kitchen just as the machine cut in. It wasn't a call, it was an invitation. An hour later, she sat in the school principal's office. The room smelled of floor wax and stale coffee. Principal Holloway, a man who had been a pallbearer at Arthur's funeral, wouldn't look her in the eye. He toyed with a manila folder, her personnel file. "Evelyn," he said softly, "this is a small town. A teacher's reputation isn't just about what happens in the classroom. It's about the legacy she carries. There are rumors that you're looking into things that are private, family matters. My father's matters involved the systematic destruction of my mother, Bill," Evelyn said, her voice trembling. Holloway finally looked up, his expression a mask of pity that felt like a slap. He was a great man. The board doesn't want to see his name dragged through the mud by a daughter who might be struggling with her own grief. Perhaps a leave of absence is best. Indefinite. He slid the folder across the desk. It was a closed door. Evelyn walked out into the bright, judgmental sunlight of Charleston. She was halfway to her car when a cruiser pulled alongside her. Miller didn't get out. He leaned out the window, the sun reflecting off his badge. "I told you, Evelyn," he said, his voice a low rasp. "The ground is level. Stop digging, or you might find yourself in the hole with him." She drove home in a blur of rage and terror. The journals were sitting on the kitchen table, a mountain of leather and lies. In a fit of sudden, violent impulse, she grabbed the top 3 and threw them into the fireplace, striking a match. The flames took hold instantly, the leather curling and hissing. But as the smell of burning paper filled the room, a horrific realization struck her. If these went, the truth went with them. Her mother's suffering would be nothing but a ghost story. "No!" she screamed, lunging for the hearth. She grabbed the heavy iron poker and raked the charred, smoking books onto the rug, beating out the sparks with her bare hands. She slumped onto the floor, clutching the blackened, soot-stained journals to her chest, sobbing into the smell of ash. She couldn't do this alone. Her fingers fumbled with her phone. She called Thomas first. Her brother, the high-priced lawyer in the city, the man who had built a life on being untouchable. "Thomas, you have to come back," she gasped when he answered. "Now. I found them. The journals. He killed her, Thomas. Not with a knife, but he killed her." Then she called Sarah, her sister, the one who had never truly left the fog of the valley, who drifted from one blurred high to the next. "Get to the house, Sarah. Tomorrow, noon. Don't ask questions. Just come." Evelyn stood by the window that night, the curtains pulled back just an inch. The valley was swallowed in a thick, milky fog that made the trees look like drowned giants. Down by the old oak at the edge of the property, a figure stood. It didn't move. It didn't have a face in the gloom, just a dark, solid presence that watched the house with a patient, predatory stillness. The hunt had begun. The silence of the next morning was broken by the aggressive roar of a German engine. Thomas's silver sedan screeched into the driveway, kicking up a plume of gravel that rattled against the siding like gunfire. He didn't even turn off the lights before he was out of the car, his wool coat flapping around his legs. He burst through the front door, his face a mask of controlled, professional fury. "Are you insane?" he shouted, slamming his briefcase onto the hall table. "Calling me with those accusations on an unsecure line. Do you have any idea what's at stake, Evelyn? I'm up for partner. My name is the only thing I have." "Your name is a lie, Thomas," Evelyn said, standing at the top of the stairs, her voice flat. "Come to the parlor. See for yourself." Before they could speak further, the door creaked open again. Sarah drifted in, looking like a ghost caught in a draft. She smelled of cheap wine and the kind of heavy perfume used to hide a week without a shower. Her eyes were wide, the pupils blown. "The house feels wrong," Sarah whispered, her hands shaking so violently she had to tuck them into her armpits. "He's still here. I can hear him breathing in the vents." "He's not here, Sarah," Thomas snapped, though he glanced nervously at the ceiling. "He's dead. And if Evelyn has her way, he's going to take us down with him." They gathered in the parlor, the room still smelling of the fire from the night before. Evelyn laid the journals out. She watched Thomas's face as he read, watched the color drain from his cheeks, then return in a mottled, angry red. "We burn them," Thomas said, his voice a harsh whisper. He looked at Evelyn with a desperate, wild light in his eyes. "We burn them right now. We tell no one. We sell the house and we never come back." "We can't," Evelyn said. "He didn't just do this to us. Look at the names, Thomas. Miller, Holloway, the judge. They were all part of it. A society of order. They used his methods on the whole town." "I don't care about the town," Thomas roared, lunging for the table. Evelyn threw herself over the books. "No!" They struggled, a pathetic, desperate scramble for the leather volumes. Thomas was stronger, his hands gripping the back of her neck as he tried to pry the books away. "You're going to ruin me. I won't let you." A sudden, sharp crack echoed through the room. A brick shattered the front window, sending a spray of glass across the floor. Attached to it was a heavy piece of cardstock. Thomas let go of Evelyn, both of them ducking as the cold wind whistled through the jagged hole. Evelyn picked up the brick. The message was written in thick, red marker. "Traitors to the blood, pay in full. They're watching us," Sarah whimpered, backing into a corner. The escalation didn't stop at bricks. The next morning, Evelyn stepped onto the porch to find a gift. A fox, its fur matted with dried gore, had been nailed to the ancient oak facing the front door. Its eyes were milky marbles of accusation. The copper smell of blood hung heavy in the morning mist. "They're hunting us," Evelyn whispered, the realization sinking in like a stone. Thomas spent the day boarding up the windows, the frantic thud, thud, thud of the hammer, a rhythmic heartbeat for their paranoia. Between the boards, Evelyn watched the town. She saw the black SUVs idling at the end of the drive. She saw the way the neighbors turned their heads in unison when she looked out. By the third day, Sarah disappeared. Evelyn found her window open, the curtains fluttering like a surrender flag. She knew where her sister would go when the world got too loud. "I'm going to the flats," Evelyn told Thomas, who was sitting in Arthur's chair with a kitchen knife in his hand. "You'll never make it back," he said, not looking up. The flats were the town's open wound, a cluster of rusted trailers and collapsed shacks where the law didn't go unless they were carrying a body bag. Evelyn drove her old car through the mud-slicked streets, her headlights cutting through the gloom. She found the group of men first. They were standing outside a collapsed warehouse, their faces obscured by the shadows of their hoods. As her car slowed, they moved with a coordinated, predatory grace surrounding the vehicle. "Looking for your sister, McCoy?" one of them yelled, kicking her headlight. the plastic shattering with a sickening pop. She's inside, getting what a traitor deserves. Evelyn didn't think. She threw the car into reverse, tires spinning in the muck, and then lunged out the door, sprinting for the warehouse. She burst through the rusted doors into a room that smelled of ammonia and despair. Sarah was slumped on a mattress in the corner, her face a map of bruises, her arm tied off with a dirty rag. "Sarah, get up!" Evelyn screamed, hauling her sister's dead weight toward the exit. The men were closing in, their voices a low, rhythmic chant of Arthur's favorite slogans. Order through discipline, strength through silence. Evelyn dragged Sarah to the car just as a heavy boot shattered her driver's side window. She shoved Sarah into the back and floored it, the car fishtailing through the mud, narrowly missing a concrete pylon. They made it back to the house, but the sanctuary was gone. The estate was surrounded. The day of the memorial luncheon arrived with a sky the color of a fresh bruise. Evelyn stood in the center of the boarded-up parlor, the darkness of the house pressing in on her. Outside, she could hear the rhythmic crunch, crunch, crunch of gravel. Dozens of cars, hundreds of people. The society was coming to reclaim their history. "We have to go out there," Evelyn said, her voice steady for the first time in days. She looked at Thomas, whose expensive suit was covered in dust and sweat, and at Sarah, whose face was a swollen ruin. "They'll kill us," Sarah whispered. "They're already killing us," Evelyn replied. She grabbed the final journal, the one Arthur had finished the night he died. She hadn't read the last entry yet. She opened it now, her eyes scanning the neat, cold script. Final entry. The experiment concludes. My wife is dead. My children are broken. The town is a clockwork mechanism of my own design. I have proven that love is merely a lack of leverage. I die knowing that they will spend the rest of their lives trying to earn a ghost's approval. He didn't even hate us, Evelyn whispered, a jagged laugh escaping her throat. We were just a math problem he solved. A heavy, rhythmic pounding began at the front door. Boom, boom, boom. "Open up, Evelyn," Miller's voice boomed through a megaphone. "The town is waiting to honor its favorite son. Don't make us come in and get you." Thomas looked at the door, then at the journals. Something in him finally snapped. The carefully cultivated fear of a lifetime finally curdling into a pure, crystalline rage. He grabbed a heavy brass candlestick from the mantel. "Let them in," Thomas said. Evelyn opened the door. The sunlight was blinding. A sea of black suits and mourning veils stretched across the lawn. At the center, on a raised dais, stood a massive portrait of Arthur McCoy, draped in black silk. Miller stood at the base of the steps, his hand on his holster. "Give us the records, Evelyn. For the archives." "The archives are right here, Sheriff," Evelyn said, stepping onto the porch. She didn't wait. She began to read. Her voice, trained to project in classrooms, carried across the silent lawn. She read the dates. She read the names of the men who had paid Arthur to discipline their wives. She read the accounts of the midnight meetings in the Ratisha basement, where they planned the re-education of the town's youth. The crowd shifted. A low, dangerous murmur began to rise, like a swarm of hornets. "Stop her!" Miller yelled, lunging for the porch. Thomas met him at the top of the steps. The two men collided with a sickening thud. Thomas swung the candlestick with a desperate, clumsy strength, catching Miller across the temple. The sheriff went down, his blood staining the white-painted wood of the porch. "Keep reading," Thomas screamed, pinning Miller to the floor. Evelyn didn't stop. She read about the mayor's secret debts. She read about the principal's involvement in the Phase 2 trials. The crowd was no longer a monolith. People in the back were starting to look at the people in the front with newfound horror. The society was being stripped bare in the light of a Tuesday afternoon. Sarah crawled to the edge of the porch, her voice a cracked, high-pitched wail. He recorded it all. He thought you were all pathetic. He kept receipts of your cowardice. A group of loyalists, the men from the flats and the younger members of the cult, rushed the stage. They tore the boards from the windows, their hands clawing at the porch. Evelyn felt a hand grab her hair, jerking her head back. She saw the flash of a knife. "The truth is already out," she screamed, throwing the pages of the journal into the wind. The wind caught them. Hundreds of sheets of paper, covered in Arthur's meticulous, damning script, swirled into the air like white birds. They drifted over the crowd, falling into the hands of the very people Arthur had spent a lifetime manipulating. The violence paused. People were grabbing the pages, their eyes widening as they recognized their own names, their own secrets, their own shame. The mayor tried to speak, his face a mask of sweating terror. But a woman in the third row, the wife of the town's only doctor, stepped forward and slapped him so hard the sound echoed off the house. The myth of Arthur McCoy died in that moment. It wasn't a grand explosion. It was a slow, agonizing deflation. A week later, the fog finally lifted from the valley. Evelyn stood on the porch, her bags packed. The house was empty now, the furniture sold or donated, the walls stripped bare. The fox was gone from the tree, and the blood on the porch had been scrubbed away, though a faint, dark stain remained in the grain of the wood. Thomas stood by the car. He looked older, his expensive suit replaced by a simple sweater. A permanent scar tracing his jawline where Miller's ring had caught him. He had resigned from his firm. "Where will you go?" he asked. "Somewhere without a history," Evelyn said. Sarah was already in the back seat, her eyes clear for the first time in a decade. She was holding a book, not a journal, but a novel. Evelyn looked back at the house one last time. It looked small now. Just a collection of wood and nails that had been allowed to mean too much for too long. She climbed into the passenger seat and closed the door. As they drove down the long, winding road out of Charleston, the sun hit the river, turning the water into a ribbon of molten silver. Evelyn opened the window and let the mountain air fill her lungs. It didn't taste like dust or tobacco. It tasted like nothing at all. It tasted like a beginning,